Hello and welcome back to the One United podcast. I'm joined as ever by Henry. Henry, how you doing?
Yes, I'm good. You?
Very well, very well. We're joined today by Robin. Robin, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks.
So, for those of you who don't know, for any reason, Robin's I believe, a French specialist journalist. I believe you cover France a lot. So we're just going to be previewing the PSG versus Manchester United game today. So we'll get straight into it. I'll come to you first, Henry. How are you feeling for today's game?
To be honest, considering both kind of teams' styles, I'm not actually feeling that bad. If it was someone that's good at breaking teams down and that side of things, then I'd feel a little bit uneasy. But in terms of, I reckon it's just going to be pace against pace and see who scores the most goals. But I'm not too uneasy. But obviously that defense needs a bit of work. But what can you do? You just gotta accept it is what it is. And if we get beaten 5-0, we get beaten 5-0. But if we score a 1-1, then we do that. So.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I'll come to you then, Robin. Just sort of to look back, because it's obviously the first time the teams have met, especially at the Parc des Princes, since that big night in Paris for United. So, sort of, what effect did that game have on the team and as on the fans in general?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that was a huge night for PSG because they were expected to go through after winning the first leg, and the circumstances that they went out were. Certainly, PSG felt they were unfortunate, but the outcome was United going through regardless of whether they were lucky or not. And obviously, with PSG's history in the Champions League to that point, it was a real blow to them because they felt that there was a really good opportunity to get through to the quarterfinals again, and they seemed to have it in their hands and blew it. So, I mean, that was a huge blow to their morale and I suppose to their confidence. It kind of hurt their project and it forced them to take a bit of a look at what they were doing. So, obviously, last year they improved and got to the final. But I think there's still a few question marks over PSG's European pedigree because they didn't really beat a giant team to get to the final. Obviously, it was Atlanta and RB Leipzig to get there in Lisbon, and then they fell at the final hurdle to Munich. They gave them a good game, but there's still questions over just how good this PSG team actually are.
Yeah, I think that's sort of the thing giving United fans a little bit of confidence going into the game is that against teams of pedigree, I think we can still slightly class United as that because of the stature that the teams still have in the world football. I think the record against big teams in these competitions sort of speaks for itself, and that's despite United's performances, that's sort of given us a bit of hope. Now, Henry, I think it's fair to say that game sort of secured Ollie's job as a permanent manager.
Yeah,
we were absolutely riding high after that game. Now, if you can try and sort of put it into words, what's sort of gone wrong from there to lead us to this stage?
The mad thing is for me that I don't think it's necessarily changed that much. I think that game was, as Robin said, we were sort of lucky to win that. There was countless errors from PSG in that game. I think people forget that. I think people forget that one of the goals was just a keeper mistake, and the others were just defensively poor. And then the penalty. I mean, we're all saying it should have been a penalty, but personally, I'm not even sure. It hit his arm, but it's probably going to Rose anyway. So, I think we were lucky in that sense. So I wouldn't say a lot's gone wrong since then. I'd just say not much has changed apart from our luck, really. And when your luck changes and you're not tactically there anyway, then that kind of, that's your downfall, really. There's no other way to go about it. And it was the same with last season. Our luck was in, and this early part of this season, it just hasn't happened. And then tactically, you start to question the manager.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because, at the time, I think even United fans would admit that it probably wasn't a penalty. But given the rule changes and what we've seen in the Premier League now, I think, now there's a lot more of a case for it being a penalty. I think if it happened again, it'd be fairly stone wall. You know, we've seen a couple of decisions, especially that have gone against Spurs recently. But you know, we'll sort of move forward to the team news then, because you know there's a lot of big absentees for both teams by the looks of it. We'll go through United's first, Henry. So it's looking like Harry Maguire, Edison Cavani, and Mason Greenwood aren't going to travel with the team or be part of the squad for the game. Now, how much of an impact do you think that'll have on the squad?
Maguire, to be fair, I think he's injured after he had a really good performance, to be fair, at Newcastle. But as we've seen Newcastle fans say after the game, they were poor. So he had a good performance, but maybe he does need a little bit of a break. I'm not sure whether it's the right game or not. In terms of Greenwood, he was out against Newcastle, so I didn't expect him to play this game. And Cavani, way too soon. Although it would have been nice for him to, 90th minute winner. It's come way too soon. So understandable. I'm not really that upset that we're missing those three players, but because it gives other players a chance to come in and play. But I can't say I'm too disappointed, but we'll see what happens.
Well, I'll come to you then, Robin. Sort of from a perspective of the PSG team, what would those absentees sort of give them a bit of confidence, or are players like Harry Maguire not really sort of feared that much by other teams?
Harry Maguire is obviously one of the most expensive defenders in the world. So when he's missing, it's United are kind of missing the linchpin of their defence, I suppose. So, PSG have got a great attack and they won't fear anybody particularly. But when you're missing your most experienced defender and on paper perhaps your best defender, then it's got to be a boost to PSG. And certainly from the Parisian perspective, that Mason Greenwood's out is probably another boost because he's obviously so exciting going forward and so quick, and especially when he's in the wide areas, dangerous. And that's one of PSG's weaknesses going into this game, or potentially could be one of their weaknesses, that maybe they're not so strong at fullback. United have obviously got other players who can come in, particularly in attack, but missing somebody like that's it's a bonus to PSG.
Yeah, just to stay with the absentees for United, then obviously probably the biggest news is that Cavani will miss out on his romantic sort of return to Paris. Now, the signing of Cavani has been questioned by a few people, but obviously you'll know a lot more about him than we will. So, do you think this is a good signing for United? And if so, what does he have to offer to this team?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big Edison Cavani fan. I think he's a very good player. He's obviously not a long-term solution at the age that he's at. But, for a short-term stopgap, if you like, he can do a very good job. He'll offer United something that perhaps they don't have at the moment and maybe haven't had since Lukaku left, and that they've got a real target man now, someone who's good with their back to goal, who's strong, who can hold the ball up, who'll bring others into the game. What he lacks is, surprisingly, considered perhaps his pedigree. He does miss a lot of chances, but at the same time he gets into a lot of good areas because his movement's so good and he's so intelligent, and he's also very good in the air despite his size. So there's a lot of positives to Cavani's game. Obviously, as you say, he's been missing he's not played competitive football since March, and even this whole year he's not really played an awful lot because he wasn't first choice at PSG when they released him. So that lack of game time could see him take a wee while to get up to speed, to get up to his best, and that'll be an issue, I guess. But I think overall he can be a useful player to United. As I say, not somebody that they can rely on for a long period, but certainly somebody who can come in and do a job in the short term.
Yeah, I think the sort of the questions raised, like you said, he's got that pedigree in the air. I think that's what he's very well known for. And I think the big disappointment with when Romelu Lukaku came in is that he didn't show the aerial threat that he promised to have, because he didn't have that sort of the delivery coming in from out wide from Ashley Young and Antonio Valencia at the time. So do you think the acquisition of Alex Telles and his quality with his deliveries can really help Cavani settle into this United team?
Yeah, I mean, Telles is somebody that PSG were linked with initially in the summer too, and he comes very highly rated. He's obviously an excellent attacking fullback, given his statistics with Porto. So you would like to think that somebody like him coming in and giving a much better supply to the centre forward would make a big difference to United going forward.
I definitely hope so. Yeah. So just sort of moving on then, Henry. Another big bit of news coming forward, obviously with Harry Maguire missing, is that Bruno Fernandes will be given the captain's armband.
Yeah.
Now, this is something that fans definitely, from what I've experienced, have been calling for a number of weeks now. So, do you see him thriving in this sort of captain's role, especially given what we've seen of him so far?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I think he was kind of a leader without being a captain in the first place. We've seen it on the pitch. We've seen him perform consistently as well. He seems to have a voice, which is good. But I guess, yeah, it will be a test to a degree for him, but I think he's more than ready for it. I think we've seen how good he really is and what leadership qualities he's got, because he demands more from the players than most others do. So, yeah, I think it was the right call, especially considering Maguire's gone. Not gone, but injured. Yeah, it was the right call, and it was exciting for us, I guess, to a level to see what he really does, because we've all been waiting for this moment for a little bit of time, even though he's only just he only joined still kind of recently, I guess. But regardless, it'd be nice to see.
Yeah, it's definitely exciting from a fan point of view, but I'll sort of come to you, Robin. So from an outsider point of view, to give the armband to someone so early in his Manchester United career, do you think that sort of makes sense? And, if not, who do you think United should have given the armband to?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it depends a lot on the player's relationship in the dressing room to other players. So I think it speaks volumes for how well he's come in and adapted to life in England. And as Harry was saying, he's been a technical leader on the park for United since he arrived in January. So I don't think I think it was the obvious solution to them. And you'd imagine it's not going to affect his game in any case, because he's the sort of player that thrives on getting the best out of others and being given a great deal of responsibility, because he's given the responsibility in the play anyway.
Yeah, I think that's pretty obvious from what we see of him on the pitch. Now we'll move to the PSG team news. Now there's sort of contrasting reports about who's available and who's not. So can you sort of give us sort of a confirmation of the absentees they'll have and who they have available?
Yep, no problem. So definitely missing for PSG. There's 5 players who have been ruled out. The first, Robin Bairner, the left back, he's definitely missing. He's a long-term issue. He's got an ACL, so he's not playing. The other issues come in midfield. There's another defensive issue. Thilo Kehra's missing. He may well have started at centre-back beside Presnel Kimpembe, so it looks like Marquinhos is going to drop back into defence. Marquinhos himself missed out at the weekend because of an injury picked up in international duty, but it seems that he's going to be fine today. He trained normally yesterday along with Julian Draxler, who is another player who is doubtful. In the midfield, meanwhile, PSG are definitely without Marco Verratti, who'll be out for the next 3 weeks, and Leandro Paredes, who picked up a knock at the weekend. These issues are pretty significant for PSG, because both of these players are their most technical midfielders. They're the guys that like to get on the ball and dictate the tempo of the game, so missing both of them does provide something of an issue. And the final player who's definitely missing is Mauro Icardi, the centre forward who took Cavani's place. His absence probably means that Kylian Mbappe is going to play centre forward tonight, flanked by Angel Di Maria, who was suspended at the weekend, and Neymar, who was left out at the weekend because he was rested after international duty. There are a couple of doubts over Marquinhos and Draxler, but it does seem that they're going to be fit, so PSG are probably just going to be without those 5 players.
Yeah, some big names missing, but it just goes to show, with all those names missing, you've still got that star quality of Kylian Mbappe and Neymar and Marquinhos and so on to sort of back you up. Now that we'll come to the sort of the big absentees in Mauro Icardi and Marco Verratti later, but I think the one I want to focus on, the one that I think is probably going under the radar as very important, is the absence of Robin Bairner. Now, he obviously scored in that game in Paris where United won, and I'm fairly confident he's saying he's PSG's first choice left back. So how much of a miss will he be for the team?
Yeah, he'll be a significant miss. Obviously, it's one they've been coping with for a few weeks now. PSG have been quite happy with the way that Mitchell Bakkers came in. He's a young player who was signed from Ajax's youth system. They've been impressed with the way he's come in and settled into the team. He's a very different player from Bernat, though he's not quite as attacking. He's can play as centre back as well, so he's a very solid defensive player, but won't offer so much going forward. The other option they could play there tonight, but seems to be less likely, is Levin Kurzawa, who's been lacking game time because he got sent off against Marseille in the second week of the season and was hit with a 6-game ban because of it. It seems unlikely he'll play. He's much better going forward than Bakar, but at the same time, he's not as strong defensively, and I think PSG are going to look for that solidarity. So Bernat's certainly going to be a significant miss because he's the guy that's most experienced. He's probably their best attacking left back, and he's probably also their best defensive left back too.
Very interesting point. It just shows how important Juan Bernat is to this PSG team. Now, Mauro Icardi is another one I want to talk about because he was, Inter Milan captain from a very young age, shot to stardom, and then got his big move to PSG, and he's sort of, from an outside point of view, he sort of slipped into the shadows of the big players like Neymar and Mbappe. Now, how well has he suited to this big sort of party lifestyle in PSG, and how is he settling in with all these big names around him?
Yeah, I mean, initially settled in very well, and that was part of the reason that PSG decided to sign him in the summer. He scored a lot of goals last season, but maybe since the start of the year, he's been much poorer. He's not contributed in terms of goals, and when Icardi's not scoring goals, he can be a bit of a liability. Unlike Cavani, for example, he doesn't provide anything like as much defensive work up front. He's not a link man in any way whatsoever. He's very much a pure centre forward who just scores goals. So at the moment, he's coming under quite a lot of criticism, and his absence tonight's not really one that the Parisians feels going to weigh heavily on them, particularly as they've got so much star quality in their front three.
Yeah, I think that goes without saying, doesn't it? But obviously the main absentee and the reason that United fans are sort of quietly confident about this game is Marco Verratti. Now, he's going under the radar, I think, going about it quietly, becoming one of the best centre midfielders in the world. On his day, maybe the best centre midfielder in the world. But can you just sort of break down for us what his game is all about and what he's so good at?
Yeah, I mean, Marco Verratti was a player who was linked from a young age to Barcelona, and that was the sort of tiki-taka Barcelona side. That was the era of tiki-taka at Barcelona, which tells you how technical a player he is, how good on the ball he is. He's just a guy who's ultra confident when he's in possession, tends to keep it quite simple in general, although he does have a tendency to hold on to the ball a little bit too much around his own box, which can get him into trouble. He's the player that sets the tempo for PSG. You won't expect him to see him very far up the park. He doesn't score an awful lot of goals. He doesn't get particularly many assists, given his quality, which is quite strange. And that's another source of criticism towards him. But just in terms of being the man that sort of PSG pivot around, he's very important, and he will certainly be a huge miss tonight.
Yeah, undoubtedly. Now, the main centre midfield options for PSG that I can think of are obviously Idrissa Gueye and Ander Herrera to come in and take his place. Now, do you think those two will do an adequate job of replacing the two crucial, important, centre midfielders that are missing? And, do you think Ander Herrera could really come back and haunt United in this game?
I mean, the centre of midfield is one of the areas that I feel that PSG need to improve upon in terms of providing much more of a goal threat and much more sort of dynamism going forward. Like you say, Ander Herrera and Idrissa Gueye are probably going to start today, but neither of them is going to give you much going forward. The other player that's probably going to start in there is Danilo, who was signed from Porto on transfer deadline day. He's yet to play for PSG, so I guess it's a bit of a baptism of fire for him. One of the other options is Rafinha, who's come from Barcelona. He was left out in the cold there, obviously, but he came in and played very well at the weekend. So we might see him play if PSG need a little bit more thrust and a wee bit more creativity in that sort of area. And it would be very surprising if he didn't play some kind of role, given that 5 substitutes are allowed. So, as I say, central midfield's an area of weakness for PSG, not in terms of technically or defensively, but just in terms of the balance of the team. They're going to rely very much on the front three to create and score their goals themselves. So missing Verratti's a big blow in that regard.
I'll come to you then, Henry. Obviously, a list of big names out for PSG now, especially the absence of Verratti and Mauro Icardi. As a United fan, does this sort of boost your confidence for the game, or are you sort of looking back with a bit of skepticism in the fact that they do have such big names still readily available?
Well, the big one for me isn't really either of those. It's Paredes for me. He's got so much quality on the ball. We saw it in the quarterfinals and semi-finals. The Champions League, he is that good on the ball. He's the kind of creative spark from that midfield, I guess you could say. So that's the big one for me. In regards to Herrera and Gay, I guess you've just got to kind of outrun them, which is difficult. But if you outwork players like that, then they don't have a hell of a lot left in their locker, to be honest. And you just cut off the lines to the front three. I guess there's not much else you can do, really. And then if it gets to the front three, then you're either in trouble or you can scrape a tackle somehow. So yeah, I'm not too worried. But Paredes for me instead of Icardi and Co is probably the big miss for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Robin, just one last thing before we move on. Obviously, we mentioned Ander Herrera. Now, it's obviously he's pretty well known now for the man-marking job he did on Eden Hazard the season that Chelsea won the league under Antonio Conte. Now, is there an option for him to sort of do a similar job on Bruno Fernandes? And do you think, by removing United's what seems as a main threat, do you think that'll give PSG an advantage?
Yeah, I mean, PSG's midfield's relatively defensively minded anyway, so I mean, I guess it's quite well set up for from their perspective, hopefully closing down Fernandes and preventing him to have an influence in the game. You would imagine that that's one of the big tactical issues that Tuchel has been looking at ahead of the match. Fernandes is so clearly the hub of just about everything good coming for United's attack. So I'd be surprised to see him deployed as an out-and-out man, given an out-and-out man-marking job on Fernandes, given the quality of the other defensive midfielders around him. But, it's certainly possible, and it would be a good idea to certainly take into consideration.
Yeah, definitely. Now, just one last thing for you then, Henry. How it's obvious that this will be the first time that Herrera's come up against United, and he was a big fan favourite. So do you think there is that possibility of him, really having a blinding game and causing an upset to his former fans?
Yeah, I mean, I guess so, but he's not one of the players I'm particularly worried about, but he'll be out there to prove a point. But again, I guess he didn't leave on bad terms, really. So I guess there's no kind of resentment or hate towards him, really. He's a fan favourite. I think in terms of why he left, people are saying it was money, but I'm sure Robin will probably be able to shed a bit more light on why he actually left and went to PSG. I think if it's money orientated, then that's fair enough. But if it's for footballing reasons, then that's also fair enough. So, I mean, there's no resentment or hate. So, to be honest, I hope he didn't play well this game. But as a United fan, I wish him well for whenever he does play. I think as long as it's like he does.
Yeah, I think from what I've heard is he left because he was unhappy with the board and how they dealt with his contract situation. Now, Robin, can you either confirm or deny these rumours and sort of tell us why he did leave and go to PSG?
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is there was more sort of push factors from United in terms of, and rather than pull factors from PSG necessarily. I believe that he was unhappy with the board, as you say. So my story would kind of match up with yours in that. Yeah, it was really driven by United why he left.
Well, just sort of the last bit on the upcoming game then. Of the players available to PSG, obviously barring the obvious candidates such as Neymar and Mbappe and Di Maria, who can really sort of cause a surprise and really sort of disrupt United today and cause a big upset?
The one player I'm looking forward to seeing tonight is the right back they signed from Roma, Alessandro Florenzi. He's looked excellent going forward in PSG's matches since he signed. He scored at the weekend and hit the post twice in 2 different instances. So he was a major goal threat. But he's yet to be tested defensively, and it'll be interesting to see just how well he does against the United attack. This is his first real sort of acid test in terms of how good he is at the back. So I think it'll be very interesting to see him. He's somebody I'll be keeping a close eye on. And he's somebody United need to keep a close eye on as well, because he's already shown with PSG that he can be devastating going forward, both in terms of providing goals and in terms of the quality of cross he can provide into the box for others.
Yeah, it's definitely, someone I didn't even consider, but it's definitely a good shout. Now, we'll move on to sort of understanding PSG outside of this game. Now, obviously, they're sort of running away with League One already again. They've made a brilliant start to the season. But, they're coming off the back of a very quiet transfer window. Now, obviously, compared to their usual standards anyway, I know they made the Icardi deal permanent and so on. But, was it just COVID related for this quiet window, or is there sort of something going on behind the scenes as to why they didn't spend much money?
It's more FFP related. They've been restricted in terms of what they can do because of the Neymar deals and the Mbappe deals in recent times, and also because they've been pretty poor at selling players. Thomas Tuchel was saying in the press a couple of weeks ago, he was complaining about sporting director Leonardo. There's quite a bit of friction between those two. But he was complaining that PSG just don't get market value for the players that they sell, and reeled off several that they had allowed to leave for free in recent years. Cavani was among them. Obviously, Thiago Silva, Adrien Rabiot, who's at Juventus. But there's a whole list of players that PSG haven't really managed to exploit to the absolute maximum in the transfer market, and because of that, their ability to sign players and to spend money on players has been significantly curtailed, which is why we saw a sort of late flurry of signings from PSG this summer, but not really an awful lot else.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. Now, this is what seems from an outsider point of view. This is a team full of sort of egos. You've got sort of Neymar's party lifestyle, and Kylian Mbappe's becoming a worldwide star. Sort of overnight. Now, is it sort of as bad as it seems? Because it just seems like it's sort of one big party at PSG at the minute. Now, can you sort of shed some light on what's going on behind the scenes in the dressing room?
Yeah, I mean, when Thomas Meunier left PSG, he's another guy who left for free in the summer. He left for Dortmund, and he complained about the sort of rock and roll lifestyle and party lifestyle. And I think that's certainly true to some extent. You certainly see Neymar in the tabloid press a lot out in the town, and the birthday parties that PSG have between their squad members are quite legendary. But at the same time, while they've got this, I think they've managed to find, perhaps for the first time in the last 6 months, a sort of togetherness and a bond that perhaps wasn't there. And I think that had a significant bearing on how well they did in the Champions League last year. So there is definitely this champagne lifestyle, but it's now kind of being backed up by substance to some extent. So while this goes on and while the squad's fine, there's probably going to be a blind eye turned to it, more or less. Obviously, COVID's kind of restricted what people can do, but as long as the squad's winning games, I don't think anybody's going to be particularly bothered.
Yeah, that sort of brings me nicely on to my next point then, because obviously Thomas Tuchel's come in and guided them to a Champions League final. Now, do you think the reason behind this sort of depleting party lifestyle is because of him and his influence? And if so, what's he done to sort of promote this?
No, I don't think it is. He's a bit of a disciplinarian to some extent, but at the same time, he doesn't really have a massive amount of control necessarily over somebody like a Kylian Mbappe, for example, or a Neymar. We saw at the end of of last season, or towards the end of last season, Mbappe publicly falling out with Tuchel when he was substituted. So I don't think it's necessarily Tuchel's influence that's had this sort of impact on it. It's just something that's organic and is perhaps growing between the squad members.
Just one sort of final point on this then. Obviously, PSG have been walking the league for a number of years now. Obviously, bar that season that Monaco won it. Now, what's the biggest threat, certainly domestically, to PSG? Do you think it's the teams around them, or do you think it's sort of collapsing from the inside because of this party lifestyle that they've sort of adopted?
It's difficult to say. I mean, it's difficult to see PSG necessarily collapsing in the near future. There are teams around them who are competitive and who are good teams. You look at Lille, who are actually top of Ligue 1 at the moment. They're unbeaten. They're the only unbeaten team in France just now. They're a very good team, but when it comes to playing, particularly now, they're going to play in European football and Ligue 1 football pretty much every week until Christmas, and they don't really have the squad depth that can allow them to compete with PSG. Rennes too have also got a very good team, but likewise they're going to struggle with juggling particularly Champions League commitments this year and Ligue 1 football. And the other teams quite simply aren't good enough at the moment. Marseille don't have enough money to go out and buy any depth to their squad, so they're likewise going to struggle in the period coming up. And Lyon, who are probably the best team to challenge them, or who are best placed to challenge them, with the likes of Memphis Depay, Ousmane, Moussa Dembele, they've been poorly managed. So, it's difficult to see an end to this sort of PSG homogeny. Maybe in the long term, somebody else will come in and buy a club. Maybe Marseille look like a club who are rife for a takeover. There were certainly links of a Saudi Arabia takeover in the summer, but nothing's come of that. But I think it would take something like that to really destabilise PSG on a long-term basis. Obviously, we've seen it on a short-term basis. Montpellier and Monaco have both won the league since QSI took over, but I think it's going to be only sporadically that sort of thing happens.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to watch from an outside point of view how these domestic teams sort of topple them. Now, Henry, I know you had a few sort of things to ask regarding this, so I'll let you take the floor then.
Robin, I was just going to ask in terms of tactically about PSG. We kind of associate them with power, pace, kind of exhilarating on the counter attack, really. So what's changed? Obviously, we've seen them get to the Champions League final and be able to break teams down. So what's changed in terms of their style of play, and how are they going to break this United side down?
I mean, a lot of it's individualism. Like you were saying, Neymar and Mbappe are so difficult to pin down. You can do it for maybe 60 minutes or even 89 minutes, but all it takes is that 1 minute lack of concentration, and PSG can score. Di Maria for me is a big part as well in terms of what he can provide. Obviously, Mbappe and Neymar get a lot of the attention, but he's a very reliable player to have sort of waiting in the wings, and he might not have produced it at United, but he's been excellent for PSG since he arrived, and if anything has become even more consistent over the last 18 months. I think it's just the sort of myriad of threats that PSG have got that allow them to ultimately break teams down. I think another big influence is the fact that they've been steadier defensively in recent times. I mean, I know there's a sort of belief in England that PSG are dodgy defensively, and while it is maybe something of a downfall to an extent, I think that's something that's overblown now and perhaps taken out of a bit out of proportion. Keylor Navas arriving from Real Madrid, so the huge influence in defence. And on the defence, he's been very assured in goals, and he's really given them a really solid base to work from that perhaps they didn't have before. So, going forward, lots of things, lots of individual talent, basically, and defensively they've improved too.
Henry, anything else?
Yeah, I was going to say, you mentioned about English kind of fans, I guess, talking about their defensive frailties. Where can United expose this team? Because we've seen defensively they were pretty sound. Even against Bayern, they looked pretty good. So where can they be exposed, and what's their biggest weakness, do you reckon?
Yeah, I mean, defensively they can definitely be, they can be exposed on the flanks. I think I mentioned before that Mitchell Bakar's come in. He's not really got any Champions League experience to speak of, very little first team experience to speak of, and then he'll probably play on the left. Or on the right, you've got Alessandro Florenzi, who's better known for his attacking qualities. I mentioned earlier that he's not really been tested defensively yet. In Italy, he's not got a reputation of being particularly strong going the other way. So it'll be interesting to see whether he kind of lives up to that bad reputation or whether he's actually a bit sturdier than the Italians have perhaps given him credit for. But that's the obvious areas where PSG can get at, or where PSG can be got at, and then obviously they can lapse in concentration sometimes too. Presnel Kimpembe can have the odd shocker. Marquinhos tends to be quite solid though, but yeah, I mean you'd be looking at the flanks primarily.
Is that it, Henry?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
Just want to bring up a comment we've received as well. Obviously, I think from Waz is a good friend of the channel. He's just joined, and he's sort of agreeing with you and what you said, Robin, there about how Florenzi. Well, what you said a couple of minutes ago, anyway, about how Florenzi offers that sort of different dimension to PSG that they sort of didn't really. Well, they sort of had with Thomas Meunier, but I think Florenzi sort of takes it to the next level. But I just wanted to round the show off by keeping it sort of somewhat topical as well, because with the big news recently was about this project Big Picture and how fans thought it would eventually lead to the inauguration of a sort of UEFA Super League sort of type thing. Now, PSG, it sort of seems like they're being held back by Ligue 1 at the minute. It's not a very financially rewarding league, especially compared to its continental competitors. Now, what does Ligue 1 need to do to sort of keep PSG interested in a way? And do you think that PSG have sort of outgrown the league and will be pushing for this sort of European Super League in years to come?
Well, I think to begin with, I think it's important to stress that it's not just Ligue 1 that's got this problem. It seems to be a Europe-wide problem. Obviously, in Spain, you've effectively got two teams that are going to win the league. Juventus have been far more dominant in Italy than PSG have been in France, remarkably. And even in Germany, you've got Bayern Munich who have been equally strong in terms of winning their own league. PSG really need some sort of competition from somewhere, and I guess you'd be looking for like I was mentioning earlier, a takeover of somebody like a Marseille. Marseille is a club with immense potential. It's obviously PSG's big rival, and has a huge support in the south of France. So, it's it might not be ethical, but I guess for French football could do with somebody like the Saudi Arabians coming in and taking over Marseille, just as they were kind of threatening to do to Newcastle in the summer, and really injecting some money in there. I think football's in a difficult situation at the moment, just in terms of where it finds itself. All the money seems to be trapped within a handful of clubs in Europe, and it's not such a big issue in England, I don't think, but certainly the European leagues are going to have to find a solution somehow, because obviously you can't have one or two teams challenging for the league title domestically on a sort of infinite basis, and it is difficult to see how that situation is going to change because of the way that football's set up currently economically. I think it's a very difficult question.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be an interesting one going forward, how these teams are sort of contained and brought back down to earth. Now, you mentioned, FFP and sort of the monetary value of PSG at this point in time. Now, we saw Man City came very close to being facing the consequences of FFP. They got out of it in the end. But how close have PSG come to being hit with a big punishment? I know they've obviously been punished before, but relatively lightly. Now, are they sort of constantly walking the tightrope, or are they a lot more comfortable than they seem?
No, they're definitely walking a bit of a tightrope. I mentioned earlier that's why they've not really signed a great deal in terms of, or they've not made a huge amount of investment in the summer. A lot of their deals have been done in terms of loans with an option to purchase. So, there's definitely that aspect of PSG walking the financial fair play tightrope, and perhaps even more so given that Mbappe and Neymar are both out of contract in roughly 18 months' time, which is going to mean they've got a very nervy end to the season as they try to tie one or both down to a longer-term deal. Otherwise, you could be looking at, obviously, they're not going to go for bargains per se, but they're going to go relatively cheaply or next summer, which PSG clearly can't afford.
It's definitely interesting that that they've got such big talents such as Mbappe and Neymar in a league that I think it is fair to say it's still not Europe's top league by any means at all, is it? Now, do you realistically see Mbappe and Neymar and players like that, Verratti as well, staying at PSG for the long run, or do you envision moves for them at somewhere in the short future? And if so, where do you think they'll go?
Obviously, Verratti's been there for a long time now, so he seems quite settled in Paris. PSG can also offer big money. They've got a great lifestyle in Paris as well. It's a wonderful city. So there's plenty of attractive things about PSG. Whether they can retain the absolute top players, Mbappe's obviously hinted that he would like to move away, possibly to Real Madrid or Liverpool, which would probably happen next summer if it happens at all. So it's going to be a major challenge for PSG to keep him. And I mean, Mbappe is probably the player they would most want to keep as well, because he's the youngest of the two superstars. He was born in Paris, and they want to make him a sort of icon of Paris. His relationship with Tuchel, which I touched on earlier, isn't necessarily watertight, so that's a problem, and it could be a problem for PSG going ahead towards the summer. And Neymar's obviously a bit of a unique situation. Can anybody afford to sign him? That's a big question, and I guess that's a question for Mbappe too. It doesn't look like anybody's going to be able to spend the kind of money on Neymar that PSG would like. Can they keep him beyond 2022? It's going to be difficult for them, but I think it's a very fluid situation, and a lot can change in the next sort of 6 months, let alone 18 months. And PSG are going to do everything they can to retain at least one of those two star players.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one looking forward. Now, just to sort of build on that, do you think Neymar and Mbappe will want to stay in Paris for the rest of their careers, or do you think they'll start pushing for moves or running down the contracts in the near future?
No, I mean, I guess the clock's already ticking on their contracts, because there's only 18 months left, which inevitably puts extra pressure on PSG to get something sorted fairly soon. I don't think Mbappe is the sort of player who will spend his whole career at PSG. He's obviously he's a huge Cristiano Ronaldo fan and a Real Madrid admirer. So I would be surprised if at some point in his career he didn't end up at Real Madrid. Obviously, in terms of his personality and his superstar qualities, he's a player that would appear to be a good fit there. And as for Neymar, I mean, everybody knows what Neymar's like. I don't think he's necessarily a player that will remain loyal to one club. If he was going to do that, he would have done it to Barcelona. So I think there's always the potential for Neymar to move. He will only move to another big superstar club. So perhaps the likes of United, if they chased him, Real Madrid. I can't see him going back to Barcelona. I think it's going to be too complicated there. But you never know with Neymar. It's a difficult thing to predict. But I don't think either of them will be retiring at PSG.
Yeah, it definitely looks that way from an outside point of view. Henry, I'll let you take the floor.
I was just going to ask about. There seems to be like I don't know whether you could call it a culture. I know PSG made it to the final of the Champions League last year, but them and Barca in recent years have been known for, I guess, bottling it in the big games. And now it looks like we're going to go back to the two-legged games. Do you reckon that's going to have an impact on them if they obviously they should get past the group stage? But But provided they do you reckon that's going to have another big impact on them, because they seem to kind of crumble under pressure at times?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. They've got this bad track record, but equally they've got a very, very good track record in the group stages. They don't tend to lose many group games. When they do lose, it tends to be to a Liverpool away or a Real Madrid away, so it tends to be a huge match that they lose. When they get into the knockout stages, I think last season's experience will help them immensely. If they had lost that match to Atlanta, where they trailed 1-0 going into the 90th minute, I think that would have been another massive blow to their reputation and to their belief that they can go on and make an impact in Europe. But I think having come through that match, even though it was a match they were universally expected to win, I guess, I think having come through that and the manner they came through it, I think that's given them a renewed belief. And I think it's been a sort of staging post to sort of obliterate that feeling that they're always going to bottle it in the Champions League or in the closing stages of the Champions League. So I think that could be a turning point for them.
Henry, anything else?
Yeah, I guess just a quick one about the owners there. They seem to, I wouldn't say they change manager all the time, but do you reckon they're going to have patience with Thomas Tuchel when it comes to, if they don't win if they don't win Champions League this year or next year, do you reckon they'll have patience with him, or do you reckon it'll be, he'll be gone and they'll just bring a new manager in?
Politically, I think at PSG, Tuchel's in the last year of his contract, so I think he's basically walking a tightrope at the moment. He doesn't get on with Leonardo, who's close to the board. He's the sporting director. So unless Tuchel does something miraculous this season, like win the Champions League, I would be very surprised to see him in charge of PSG next season.
Henry, anything to add?
Perfect. Thank you.
No, just so one last thing before we round it off now. You say there's not that relationship between the manager and director of football at PSG, and I think Leonardo's come under a lot of pressure in his time at PSG. Now, the big news, like the big consistent news at United, is the need for a director of football. But do you think PSG is sort of showing the ways that it possibly doesn't work and how it's not sort of a perfect model for every team?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that it's a complicated model, I think. But I think modern football requires that a manager can't be in charge of absolutely everything now. However, I think it's absolutely vital that if you do have a director of football, that the relationship is there with the head coach or with the manager, whoever's in charge of the first team. It's a cohesive relationship and it's an effective relationship. And because, like you see at PSG, things are a little bit frosty, and it certainly complicates life at the club. Particularly if the director of football is signing players that the head coach doesn't necessarily feel are necessary for his team. So, yeah, I mean, I do think it's important to have two people overseeing football at the club, but at the same time, the relationship there has to be a strong one. And at PSG, that's not the case at the moment.
It's definitely an interesting point to think about. Now, we'll round the show off with what we usually do with previews. We'll go quick fire predictions. So I'll come to you first, Henry. We'll go first goal scorer and final score.
First goal scorer, I reckon Mbappe is going to score first. I can't really see it any other way. And I said before, it's either going to be we're going to scrape a 1-1 draw, or it's going to be a pretty hefty 4 or 5-0 defeat.
Robin, I'll come to you. Same question.
I'm going to go with Neymar and 3-1 PSG.
Now, I'm going to sort of stay optimistic. I think Mbappe is going to give PSG the lead, but I think Rashford will give us the lead, and then we'll catch PSG on the counter again. So I'm going to go Rashford score first and 2-1 United. So yeah, that rounds up the show. Thank you ever so much to Robin for joining us. You've been a massive help. You've really shone some light on the biggest team in France. Thanks as ever to Henry for joining me, and thanks to everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time.